Dr. Aminata Kone rushed through the corridors of Ouagadougou General Hospital, her white coat flapping behind her like wings of determination. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows, but nothing could brighten the heavy atmosphere that had settled over Burkina Faso's medical community. For months, a mysterious illness had been spreading through rural villages, leaving doctors puzzled and families devastated. The disease struck without warning, targeting children and elderly people with equal ferocity. Fever, severe headaches, and respiratory problems were the first signs. Within days, victims would develop a distinctive rash that spread across their bodies like wildfire. Traditional medicines proved useless, and even modern treatments seemed to offer little hope. Village healers whispered that it was a curse, while scientists desperately searched for answers in their laboratories. Dr. Cohn had been tracking the outbreak since its first appearance in the northern province of Sahel. What started as isolated cases in remote villages had now reached the capital. The disease showed patterns unlike anything in medical textbooks. It seemed to affect people with weakened immune systems first, but healthy individuals were not safe either. The mortality rate climbed steadily, and panic began to spread faster than the illness itself. In her small research facility, Dr. Cohn worked alongside her team of dedicated researchers. They collected samples, ran tests, and analyzed data around the clock. The breakthrough came on a particularly exhausting Tuesday evening when her colleague, Dr. Ibrahim Sawadogo, noticed something unusual under his microscope. The pathogen responsible for the outbreak was unlike any virus they had encountered before. It appeared to be a hybrid, combining elements from different viral families in a way that nature rarely produced. The discovery sent shockwaves through the international medical community. Within hours, emails were flying between research institutions across the globe. The World Health Organization dispatched emergency teams to Burkina Faso, while pharmaceutical companies began calculating the costs and challenges of developing a new vaccine. But time was running out, and the people of Burkina Faso needed solutions, not just scientific curiosity. President Ibrahim Traoré received the reports with growing concern. A former military officer who had come to power promising to protect his people, he understood that this crisis could define his leadership. The economic implications were staggering. Tourism had already ground to a halt. Trade partners were imposing restrictions, and international investors were pulling back. More importantly, his people were suffering, and traditional approaches were failing. Traoré called an emergency meeting with his health ministers and top advisors. The presidential palace, usually a symbol of power and control, felt like a war room as officials debated their options. Some suggested seeking help from former colonial powers, while others advocated for traditional African solutions. The president listened to all perspectives, but his mind was already forming a different plan. Late that night, as Ouagadougou settled into an uneasy sleep, Traoré sat in his private office reviewing intelligence reports and medical data. His advisors had gone home, but the weight of leadership kept him awake. On his desk lay a folder marked International Partnerships, containing profiles of potential allies in the fight against the outbreak. One name stood out among the rest: Bill Gates, whose foundation had invested billions in global health initiatives and vaccine development. The idea seemed almost impossible. A leader of a West African nation, reaching out directly to one of the world's wealthiest philanthropists. But desperate times called for unprecedented actions. Traoré had built his political career on challenging conventional approaches and thinking outside traditional frameworks. This situation demanded nothing less than revolutionary thinking. As dawn approached, the president made his decision. He would personally reach out to the Gates Foundation, not through diplomatic channels or international organizations, but directly. The stakes were too high for bureaucratic delays. His people needed hope, and sometimes hope came from the most unexpected partnerships. The morning would bring new challenges, but it would also bring the first steps toward what could become one of the most important medical collaborations in recent history. Dr. Cohn, meanwhile, continued her research, unaware that her scientific discoveries were about to intersect with international diplomacy in ways she never imagined. The virus samples in her laboratory held secrets that could save lives, but unlocking those secrets would require resources and expertise that transcended national boundaries. The stage was set for a medical mission that would test the limits of international cooperation and human determination. The telephone call that would change everything happened on a Wednesday morning at precisely 9:47 a.m. local time. President Traoré had spent 3 days crafting his approach, consulting with his closest advisors about the best way to reach out to the Gates Foundation. Traditional diplomatic channels seemed too slow, and formal requests might get lost in bureaucratic procedures. Instead, he decided on a more direct approach that would demonstrate both urgency and sincerity. Melinda French Gates answered the initial call at the Foundation's Seattle headquarters. Her assistant had flagged it as unusual but potentially important, given that few African heads of state called directly without prior arrangements. When Traoré introduced himself and explained the situation, her response was immediate and compassionate. Within minutes, she had connected him to the Foundation's health team and promised that Bill Gates himself would be briefed within the hour. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 2 hours. Traoré spoke passionately about the crisis facing his people, describing scenes from hospitals where children lay suffering while their parents prayed for miracles. He shared Dr. Cohn's preliminary findings about the mysterious virus and emphasized that this wasn't just a national emergency, but a potential global threat. The passion in his voice transcended language barriers and cultural differences, touching something fundamental in the philanthropist's mission to improve global health. Bill Gates was in his private study reviewing agricultural development reports when the call was transferred to him. Known for his analytical approach to problem solving, he began asking detailed questions about the virus's characteristics, transmission patterns, and the current medical response. Traoré answered honestly, admitting the limitations of Burkina Faso's medical infrastructure, while highlighting the dedication and competence of local researchers like Dr. Cohn. The breakthrough moment came when Gates asked about the economic impact of the outbreak. Traoré's response revealed not just the immediate costs, but also his long-term vision for Burkina Faso's development. He spoke about wanting to build medical research capabilities that could serve all of West Africa, creating jobs and expertise that would outlast any single crisis. This wasn't just about fighting one disease. It was about building sustainable health systems for the future. Gates was impressed by Traoré's comprehensive thinking. Too often, he had encountered leaders who focused only on immediate problems without considering broader implications. Here was a president who understood that crisis could be transformed into opportunity with the right approach and partnerships. The conversation shifted from emergency response to strategic planning, exploring how international expertise could complement local knowledge and determination. Within 48 hours, a team of epidemiologists and vaccine researchers from the Gates Foundation boarded a charter flight to Ouagadougou. They carried with them portable laboratory equipment, communication devices, and most importantly, decades of experience in fighting infectious diseases in resource-limited settings. The team was led by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a veteran of previous outbreak responses in Africa and Asia. Dr. Cohn received the news of international support with mixed emotions. Part of her was relieved that help was coming, but another part worried about losing control of her research to foreign experts. These concerns evaporated when Dr. Mitchell arrived at her laboratory and immediately began asking about local findings rather than imposing external solutions. The collaboration that developed over the following days became a model of respectful international cooperation. The joint research team made rapid progress. Combining Dr. Cohn's understanding of local conditions with advanced analytical techniques brought by the Gates Foundation team, they began to unravel the virus's secrets. The pathogen was indeed unusual, but patterns emerged that suggested possible vaccine approaches. More importantly, they discovered that the virus had specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited with the right medical interventions. President Traoré visited the laboratory frequently, not as a politician seeking photo opportunities, but as a leader, genuinely interested in the scientific process. He asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to explanations, gradually building his own understanding of the challenges involved in vaccine development. His presence motivated the research team and demonstrated to the international community that Burkina Faso's leadership was fully committed to finding solutions. Meanwhile, news of the collaboration began spreading through international media and diplomatic circles. Some observers were skeptical, questioning whether a small West African nation could effectively partner with one of the world's largest charitable foundations. Others saw it as a promising example of how global health challenges could be addressed through innovative partnerships that respected both local expertise and international resources. The real test of the partnership came when preliminary vaccine trials were ready to begin. Traditional approaches would have involved years of laboratory testing, followed by careful human trials in controlled environments. But the ongoing crisis demanded faster action, and both Traoré and Gates agreed that calculated risks were necessary to save lives. The stage was set for an unprecedented collaboration between African leadership, international philanthropy, and cutting-edge medical science. The first breakthrough came at 3:30 a.m. on a rainy Thursday morning, when Dr. Cohn burst into the temporary laboratory facility shouting in French, then English, then back to French again. Her excitement was infectious, and soon the entire night shift was gathered around her computer screen, staring at data that represented months of tireless work finally paying off. The experimental vaccine formulation had shown remarkable results in laboratory tests, neutralizing the virus in ways that exceeded their most optimistic projections. Dr. Sarah Mitchell rubbed her tired eyes and studied the results carefully. In her 15 years of vaccine development, she had learned to be cautious about early successes, but these numbers were genuinely impressive. The vaccine candidate appeared to trigger a robust immune response, while showing minimal side effects in preliminary safety tests. More importantly, it seemed effective against all known variants of the mysterious virus that had been devastating Burkina Faso. Word of the breakthrough reached President Traoré before dawn. He had requested to be informed immediately of any significant developments regardless of the hour. Still in his pajamas, he studied the preliminary report with the focused attention he once brought to military intelligence briefings. The science was complex, but the implications were clear. They might have found their weapon against the outbreak that had terrorized his people for months. The celebration was short-lived, however, as the team quickly realized that success in the laboratory was only the beginning. Transforming a promising vaccine candidate into a product that could save lives required manufacturing capabilities, regulatory approvals, and distribution networks that Burkina Faso simply didn't possess. The gap between scientific breakthrough and practical solutions seemed almost insurmountable. Bill Gates received the news while attending a climate conference in Copenhagen. Despite being surrounded by world leaders and environmental experts, his attention immediately shifted to the developing situation in West Africa. He stepped away from a panel discussion about renewable energy to make a series of phone calls that would mobilize resources across 3 continents. Within hours, pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities in India, Belgium, and the United States were being briefed on the urgent need for vaccine production. The logistics were staggering. Traditional vaccine development and manufacturing timelines stretched across years, but the ongoing crisis demanded solutions in weeks, not years. Gates Foundation connections with major pharmaceutical companies proved invaluable, but even with goodwill and urgent need, the technical challenges remained formidable. Manufacturing vaccines required specialized facilities, trained personnel, and quality control systems that took time to establish. President Traoré found himself navigating uncharted territory as international attention focused on his small nation. Requests for interviews came from major news networks, while diplomatic missions from around the world sought meetings to discuss the vaccine development. Some offered assistance, others wanted to ensure their countries would receive priority access to any successful treatment. Managing these competing interests while maintaining focus on his people's immediate needs required diplomatic skills he was still developing. The breakthrough that solved the manufacturing challenge came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kwame Asante, a Ghanaian biochemist working at a facility in Accra, contacted the research team with a proposal that seemed almost too good to be true. His company had recently completed construction of a state-of-the-art vaccine manufacturing plant designed for rapid response to health emergencies. The facility was currently underutilized and could potentially be converted to produce the Burkina Faso vaccine within weeks. The proposal sparked intense negotiations involving multiple governments, international health organizations, and private companies. Ghana saw an opportunity to position itself as a regional leader in pharmaceutical manufacturing, while Burkina Faso wanted to ensure that any production agreement would prioritize their population's needs. The Gates Foundation found itself mediating between competing interests while trying to maintain focus on the ultimate goal of saving lives. Dr. Cohn traveled to Accra to inspect the manufacturing facility personally. What she found exceeded her expectations. Modern equipment, trained technicians, and quality control systems that met international standards. More importantly, she discovered a team of African scientists and engineers who understood both the technical challenges and the human urgency behind their work. The collaboration felt natural and respectful, building on shared experiences and common goals. The final piece of the manufacturing puzzle fell into place when the World Health Organization agreed to fast-track their regulatory review process. Recognizing the exceptional circumstances and the quality of the research data, WHO officials committed to completing their evaluation in weeks rather than months. This decision would prove controversial among some regulatory experts, but it reflected the organization's commitment to responding flexibly to health emergencies. As production plans took shape, President Traoré realized that success would bring new challenges. How should the limited initial vaccine supply be distributed? Which communities should receive priority? How could they ensure equitable access while maintaining public confidence in the vaccination program? These questions would test his leadership in ways that military training had never prepared him for. But they were good problems to have compared to the helpless watching of his people suffer. The stage was now set for the most critical phase of the entire endeavor, transforming scientific breakthrough and international collaboration into concrete action that would save lives across Burkina Faso and potentially beyond. The first batch of vaccines arrived at Ouagadougou International Airport on a humid Tuesday afternoon, carried in a specially equipped cargo plane that had flown non-stop from Accra. President Traoré stood on the tarmac alongside Dr. Cohn and other officials, watching as technicians carefully unloaded the precious cargo. The boxes containing thousands of vaccine doses represented months of scientific collaboration, international diplomacy, and unprecedented cooperation between African nations. The moment felt surreal to Dr. Cohn, who remembered the early days of the outbreak, when she had worked alone in her small laboratory, struggling to understand the mysterious virus with limited resources. Now vaccines developed from her research were about to be administered to her own people. The journey from scientific curiosity to life-saving intervention had taken less than 8 months, a timeline that would have been impossible without the international partnership that had evolved from President Traoré's bold outreach. Distribution of the vaccines required careful planning and community engagement. Burkina Faso's health ministry had worked closely with traditional leaders, religious authorities, and local organizations to build trust and ensure widespread acceptance. In rural villages where modern medicine often competed with traditional healing practices, this cultural sensitivity proved crucial. Village elders who had initially been skeptical of foreign intervention became advocates when they understood that the vaccine had been developed through partnership rather than imposed from outside. The first vaccination ceremony took place at Ouagadougou General Hospital, where the outbreak had first been identified. Dr. Cohn volunteered to receive the first injection, a gesture that demonstrated her confidence in the vaccine she had helped develop. President Traoré followed immediately afterward, and their example was broadcast live on national television and radio. Within hours, vaccination centers across the country reported long lines of people waiting to receive their doses. Bill Gates monitored the vaccination rollout from Seattle, receiving hourly updates on distribution progress and early safety data. His foundation had committed to funding not just vaccine development, but also the infrastructure needed for effective distribution. Mobile vaccination units reached remote villages, while urban centers established temporary clinics in schools and community buildings. The logistical challenge was immense, but careful planning and local knowledge made rapid progress possible. International media attention intensified as preliminary results showed the vaccine's effectiveness in real-world conditions. Within 2 weeks of the first vaccinations, new infection rates began declining in treated populations. More importantly, hospitalizations dropped dramatically, and the death toll that had been climbing steadily for months finally began to level off. The success story attracted visitors from other African nations facing similar health challenges. The collaboration between Burkina Faso and the Gates Foundation became a case study in innovative international partnerships. Unlike traditional aid relationships where wealthy countries or organizations provided assistance to passive recipients, this arrangement treated both parties as equal partners with valuable contributions. Burkina Faso brought local expertise, cultural knowledge, and determined leadership, while the Gates Foundation provided financial resources, technical capabilities, and international connections. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had initially expected to spend a few weeks in Ouagadougou, found herself extending her stay repeatedly as new opportunities emerged. The successful vaccine development had created momentum for broader health system improvements. The Gates Foundation began discussing long-term investments in medical research capacity, training programs for local scientists, and infrastructure development that would serve the entire West African region. President Traoré discovered that success brought both opportunities and new pressures. International leaders began reaching out to learn from Burkina Faso's experience, while pharmaceutical companies sought partnerships for future vaccine development projects. Managing these relationships while maintaining focus on his people's immediate needs required diplomatic skills that he continued developing through direct experience rather than formal training. The most significant challenge emerged as neighboring countries began requesting access to the vaccine. Limited production capacity meant difficult decisions about priorities and allocation. Traoré found himself balancing humanitarian concerns with practical constraints, national interests with regional solidarity. These decisions tested his leadership philosophy and required consultation with traditional advisors, religious leaders, and civil society organizations. Breakthrough that resolved the regional access challenge came when several West African governments agreed to establish a joint vaccine procurement and distribution mechanism. Building on the success of the Burkina Faso model, they committed to pooling resources and sharing expertise for future health emergencies. The Gates Foundation agreed to support this regional approach, recognizing that sustainable health security required broader cooperation beyond individual country initiatives. As vaccination coverage expanded across Burkina Faso, communities began returning to normal activities. Markets reopened, schools resumed classes, and families gathered for celebrations that had been postponed during the outbreak. The psychological impact of having effective protection against the mysterious disease was as important as the medical benefits. People who had lived in fear for months began planning for the future again. The success also generated unexpected economic benefits. International recognition of Burkina Faso's scientific capabilities attracted foreign investment in healthcare and biotechnology sectors. Universities from Europe and North America began establishing exchange programs with local institutions, while pharmaceutical companies explored opportunities for research and development partnerships based in West Africa. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, delivered by diplomatic pouch to President Traoré's office in Ouagadougou. Bill Gates personally requested a face-to-face meeting to discuss the future of their partnership and explore opportunities for expanding their collaboration beyond the immediate vaccine crisis. The proposed meeting location was significant, not in Seattle or Washington, but in Lagos, Nigeria, at an African health summit where leaders from across the continent would gather to discuss medical innovation and sustainable development. Preparing for the meeting required careful consideration of both diplomatic, protocol, and substantive policy goals. President Traoré consulted with his advisors, but he also spent hours in conversation with Dr. Kone and other scientists who had been central to the vaccine development success. Their insights would be crucial for any discussion about future partnerships and the direction of healthcare development in Burkina Faso and the broader region. The flight to Lagos gave Traoré time to reflect on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. Less than a year earlier, he had been grappling with a mysterious disease that threatened to overwhelm his country's healthcare system. Now he was traveling to meet one of the world's most influential philanthropists as an equal partner in a collaboration that had captured international attention and potentially saved thousands of lives. Bill Gates arrived in Lagos with a small team of foundation executives and technical advisors. Unlike many high-profile international meetings, this gathering was designed for substantial work rather than ceremonial photo opportunities. The Gates Foundation had prepared detailed proposals for long-term partnership arrangements that could transform healthcare delivery across West Africa. building on the successful model established in Burkina Faso. The meeting began in a conference room overlooking Lagos Harbor, with both leaders accompanied by their respective teams. The atmosphere was professional but warm, reflecting the mutual respect that had developed through months of successful collaboration under crisis conditions. Gates opened the discussion by acknowledging the exceptional leadership that Traoré had demonstrated throughout the vaccine development process. While Traoré expressed gratitude for the Foundation's rapid response and unwavering commitment to African-led solutions, the substantive discussions focused on three major areas: sustainable vaccine manufacturing capacity in West Africa, regional disease surveillance systems, and educational programs to train the next generation of African medical researchers. Each topic required balancing ambitious goals with practical constraints, international expertise with local ownership, and immediate needs with long-term development objectives. The vaccine manufacturing discussion revealed the scale of transformation that had already begun. The success of the Burkina Faso vaccine had demonstrated that African countries could develop and produce sophisticated medical products with appropriate support and investment. Gates proposed expanding manufacturing capacity across multiple countries, creating redundancy and resilience that would serve the entire continent during future health emergencies. Regional disease surveillance emerged as perhaps the most technically complex but strategically important component of their expanded partnership. The mysterious virus that had struck Burkina Faso might have been contained more quickly if better monitoring systems had been in place across West Africa. Gates Foundation technical experts presented plans for networked laboratories, trained epidemiologists, and communication systems that could detect and respond to health threats before they became major crises. The educational component of their partnership generated the most passionate discussion from both leaders. Traoré emphasized his belief that sustainable development required not just infrastructure and technology, but human capacity that could adapt and innovate over time. Gates shared stories from successful education initiatives in other regions, while also acknowledging the unique cultural and economic context that shaped African educational needs. During a break in the formal discussions, the two leaders walked along Lagos Harbor without their full teams, engaging in more personal conversation about leadership, responsibility, and the unexpected paths that had brought them together. Gates spoke about his transition from technology entrepreneur to global health advocate, while Traoré reflected on his journey from military officer to president to international health diplomat. The breakthrough moment came when they began discussing governance structures for their expanded partnership. Traditional international development arrangements often created dependency relationships that limited local autonomy and long-term sustainability. Both leaders wanted something different, a partnership structure that would evolve over time, gradually transferring more responsibility to African institutions while maintaining access to international resources and expertise. Their solution was innovative and unprecedented. They agreed to establish a joint foundation headquartered in Ouagadougou, but with regional offices across West Africa. This organization would be governed by a board with equal representation from African countries and international partners, with leadership rotating between regions every few years. The Gates Foundation would provide initial funding and technical expertise, but the long-term goal was financial independence through diverse revenue sources including African government contributions, private sector partnerships, and revenue from successful vaccine and pharmaceutical developments. The announcement of their expanded partnership was made at the main session of the African Health Summit, with both leaders addressing an audience of health ministers, medical researchers, and development experts from across the continent. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with several countries immediately expressing interest in joining the initiative and contributing resources to its implementation. Behind the public celebration, both leaders understood that the real work was just beginning. Transforming ambitious plans into operational programs would require sustained commitment, careful management, and the ability to adapt to unexpected challenges. The success of the Burkina Faso vaccine had proven that innovative partnerships could achieve remarkable results, but scaling those successes to regional and continental levels would test their collaboration in entirely new ways. 6 months after the historic handshake in Lagos, the transformed landscape of West African healthcare was becoming visible across multiple countries. The joint foundation established by Traoré and Gates had opened its headquarters in a gleaming new building in Ouagadougou, where Dr. Cohn now served as chief scientific officer, alongside international colleagues from the Gates Foundation. The facility housed advanced laboratories, training centers, and coordination offices that managed health initiatives across 15 African countries. The success of the original vaccine had ripple effects that nobody had fully anticipated. Pharmaceutical companies that had previously ignored African markets began establishing research partnerships with local institutions. University students across West Africa were choosing medical and scientific careers in unprecedented numbers, inspired by seeing their own countries at the forefront of global health innovation. Traditional healers and modern medical practitioners were collaborating more effectively, recognizing that both approaches had valuable contributions to community health. President Traoré found himself in an unexpected role as an international advocate for African-led development. Speaking at conferences in Geneva, New York, and Beijing, he shared the story of how crisis had been transformed into opportunity through partnership based on mutual respect, rather than traditional aid relationships. His message resonated with leaders from other developing countries who were seeking alternatives to conventional development models that often created dependency rather than capacity. The Regional Disease Surveillance Network had proven its worth when a new viral outbreak emerged in Sierra Leone. Within 48 hours of the first reported cases, mobile laboratories from the Joint Foundation were on site, working alongside local health authorities to identify the pathogen and develop response strategies. The outbreak was contained within 2 weeks, preventing the kind of regional spread that had characterized earlier health emergencies in West Africa. Bill Gates visited Ouagadougou regularly, but his role had evolved from crisis responder to long-term partner in continental transformation. During one visit, he spent an entire day at the University Medical School, talking with students who were conducting research that built upon the original vaccine development. These young scientists represented the future of African healthcare, technically sophisticated, culturally grounded, and committed to solving problems that affected their own communities. The manufacturing capacity that had been developed for the original vaccine was now producing treatments for multiple diseases. The Accra facility had been joined by similar installations in Senegal and Nigeria, creating a network of pharmaceutical production that served both local needs and export markets. African countries were becoming suppliers of medical products to other developing regions, reversing traditional trade patterns that had made them dependent on imports from wealthy nations. Dr. Cohn reflected on the transformation during a quiet evening in her laboratory, now expanded to include research teams from 6 countries working on various aspects of infectious disease control. The mysterious virus that had terrorized Burkina Faso was now completely controlled, with vaccination programs maintaining population immunity and surveillance systems monitoring for any new variants. But the experience had taught lessons that extended far beyond any single disease. The educational initiatives were producing the most profound long-term changes. Scholarship programs funded by the Joint Foundation had enabled hundreds of African students to pursue advanced training in medical research, epidemiology, and pharmaceutical development. Unlike traditional brain drain patterns where educated Africans migrated permanently to wealthy countries, these programs were designed to build capacity within African institutions while maintaining connections to international research. Network's President Traoré's domestic political standing had been strengthened by the international recognition of his leadership during the health crisis. But more importantly, the successful partnership had demonstrated to his own people that their country could compete on the global stage and contribute to solving problems that affected millions of people. National pride and confidence had been restored in ways that traditional development projects had never achieved. The financial sustainability of the expanded partnership was exceeding projections. Revenue from vaccine sales, patent licensing, and consulting services was reducing dependence on foundation grants. Several African governments had increased their health budgets significantly, while private sector partners were investing in healthcare infrastructure and research facilities across the region. The virtuous cycle of success generating resources for further investment was becoming self-reinforcing. International recognition came in many forms. The World Health Organization awarded its highest honor to both Traoré and Gates for their innovative partnership model. Medical journals published case studies of the vaccine development process, highlighting how rapid response could be achieved without compromising safety or scientific rigor. Business schools began teaching courses on public-private partnerships using the Burkina Faso example as a model for effective international collaboration. The most meaningful recognition, however, came from ordinary people whose lives had been directly affected by the vaccine and the broader health system improvements it had catalyzed. Children who would have died from the mysterious virus were now healthy and attending school. Parents who had lived in fear during the outbreak were now participating in community health programs that prevented other diseases. Villages that had been isolated during the crisis were now connected to regional healthcare networks that provided ongoing support and protection. As President Traoré prepared for his next international trip to share the partnership model with leaders in East Africa, he paused to consider how far they had traveled from those desperate early days of the outbreak. The handshake with Bill Gates in Lagos had been more than a ceremonial gesture. It had symbolized a new kind of relationship between African leadership and international partners. The success of their collaboration was measured not just in lives saved, but in capacity built, confidence restored, and possibilities opened for future generations across an entire continent.